Adeline Thorne walked 11 miles of dust to keep her farm, and the Cattlemen's Trust made her wait on a hard bench until the lobby emptied. Coat mended at both elbows, hat in hand. She never complained. Harlan Pike didn't even look up. This bank doesn't lend patience to women who can't read a mortgage. 19 townsfolk heard him. 2 looked away. That same morning a letter had come from a saint. Louis Trust addressed to her, and folded deep in her worn satchel sat a single piece of paper Harlan Pike would have paid his whole building to burn. What was it? Not yet. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have looked closer, this story is for you. Subscribe before we begin, and comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far Adeline's story travels. Adeline Thorne rose before the sun, the way she had for 40 years. The lamp still burned on the kitchen table. Outside, the dust lay over Ridgeway like gray snow that never melted. It was autumn of 1934. The drought had been 3 years long by then. Kansas had gone the color of old bone. The wind carried the topsoil of 100 failed farms and dropped it on porches, in wells. Between the pages of shut Bibles, people swept and swept. The dust came back. But not on her land. The river bottom farm sat low against Cottonwood Creek. Josiah had cleared it himself, stone by stone, 40 years back. And Josiah had done one thing his neighbors never bothered to do. He had dug the old irrigation ditch by hand, and he had kept it clean. And he had taught his wife to keep it clean after him. So while the whole county turned to powder, the river bottom held a thin green line along the water. Corn that still stood. A garden that still gave. The last living acreage on the creek. Men drove past it slow now. They looked at that green the way hungry men look through a bakery window. Adeline was 68. Her hands were brown and knotted at the knuckles. Her coat was mended at both elbows, neat stitches, her own work, because she would not throw a thing away while it could still do its job. She wore a plain hat. She kept her back straight. And every night, before she slept, she did the same thing. She read Josiah's ledger. It was a small book, pocket-sized, black leather worn soft as a glove. Josiah had carried it in his breast pocket for 30 years, first in one life and then in another. She kept it by the lamp. She turned its pages the way other widows turned to scripture, slow, with reverence, mouthing the figures. Josiah had not always been a farmer. Before the plow, he had worn a suit. He had been a bank examiner. He had ridden all over the state on the railroad, opening the books of small banks, checking the sums, finding the lies men hid inside neat columns. He had a gift for it. He could look at a ledger and hear it breathing. He used to say a set of books talked if you knew the language, and most banks, if you listened close, were quietly telling you they were afraid. He had given it up for the land, but he never gave up the habit of reading. And he had passed the language to her over 40 winters at that table. She could add a column faster than the teller in town. She could spot a padded figure at a glance. Nobody knew that. Why would they? She was only the old widow from the bottomland, coat mended at the elbows, walking to town in shoes she had resoled twice. That morning she had a harder thing than dust on her mind. She owed the bank money. $3,200 on the mortgage Josiah had signed against the farm in a better year. The plan had always been simple. Good harvests would pay it down. But the good harvests had died in the drought like everything else. Last year's crop came in thin. This year's came in thinner. She had paid what she could, down to the last coin she could spare, and it had not been enough. The Cattlemen's Trust Bank of Ridgeway had posted the notice. 40 days. 40 days to redeem the note, or the farm would go to auction on the courthouse steps. She had counted the days on the calendar with a pencil. She was not a woman who panicked, but she felt the clock now, ticking under everything, the way you feel a low fever before you admit you are sick. She asked for one thing. Only one. One more growing season. Let her bring in one more harvest, and she would make it right. She had walked to town to ask it. 11 miles. She walked because the mule was old and the wagon wheel wanted a rim she could not pay for. 11 miles of dust, in the mended coat, the small satchel over her shoulder. She did not complain about the walk. She had stopped complaining about most things the year Josiah died. Complaint changed nothing, and it wore a person down, and she had work to do. The Cattlemen's Trust sat on the main square. It was the tallest building in Ridgeway, brick and stone, with tall front windows and a name in gold on the glass. Inside it was cool and dim and smelled of ink and floor wax. A long counter ran down one side, brass bars, a marble top worn smooth by 10,000 hands. Behind the counter, the tellers. Behind them, a door of frosted glass with one word on it, President Harlan Pike. Adeline came in out of the heat and took off her hat. She gave her name to the young teller at the end of the counter. She said she had a meeting with Mr. Pike about her note. The young man's face changed a little when she said it. He was maybe 22, sandy hair, a collar too big for his neck. Clay Dorsey. He said, "Yes, ma'am, misters. Pike knew she was coming, and would she please wait?" So she waited. There was a bench along the front wall, hard oak, no cushion. She sat on it with her satchel in her lap and her hands folded on the satchel and her back straight. And she waited. And the morning went on. Men came and went at the counter. A cattle buyer. A grain man. 2 women from the church society. Each one came in after her, and each one was seen before her. She watched the frosted door open and shut, and each time it was for somebody else. She did not say a word. She sat on the hard bench with her hands folded, and she waited while the lobby filled and emptied and filled again. Clay Dorsey watched her from behind the counter. She saw him watching. Once, when Pike was not on the floor, the young man came out with a tin cup of coffee, warm, and set it beside her on the bench without a word, just a quick shy dip of his head, and went back to his window before anyone could mark it. She thanked him with her eyes. She drank the coffee. It was the only kindness the building offered her that day, and she remembered it. Across the lobby, at a broad table by the window, another man had spread out a map. He was heavy and well-dressed, a gold watch chain across his vest, and he was not from the bank. Vernon Kessler. A landman. A speculator, they called him, and a director of the trust besides, which meant he had Pike's ear and Pike's key. He had a plat map unrolled on the table, weighted at the corners with a stapler and an inkwell, and he was leaning over it with a pencil, and he was talking. Not quietly. "There's nothing left in this county worth $1, Kessler was saying to the clerk beside him. He tapped the map with the pencil. Tap, tap, dust, 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 and mortgages nobody can pay. Except this. Tap. The river bottom, the Thorne place. He said it plain, with her sitting not 30 feet away. The only parcel worth taking in this whole dead county. Water rights and a live ditch. A man could make that pay. The rest can blow to Oklahoma for all I care." Adeline heard every word. She looked at the coffee cup in her hands. She did not turn her head. The bell over the front door rang. The postman came in, dusting his shoulders, a leather bag on his hip. He had letters for the bank, and he had one for her, because he knew she would be in town, and had brought it along rather than carry it the 11 miles out. He came over to the bench and touched his cap. "Mrs. Thorne, this come for you." He handed her a letter. It was heavy. Good paper. Thick. The kind that costs money. Across the top corner was an embossed line, raised letters you could feel with a thumb. Meridian Trust. St. Louis. Adeline took it and looked at it a moment. Then she slid it into her satchel, unopened, and closed the flap and said, "Thank you, Elton." That was all. She did not read it there. She did not explain it. A woman on the far bench watched her do it and leaned to the woman beside her and murmured something behind her hand. Adeline caught the shape of it. Poor old thing. Another dunning notice, most like. Owes money in the city too. She let them think it. It cost her nothing to let people think small of her. She had learned long ago that it often cost them more. The morning wore down. Clay came near again to refill the cup, and this time, with the coffee, he crouched a little by the bench close and spoke low. "He's making you wait on purpose, Mrs. Thorne, I'm sorry. It isn't right." "I know it, son," she said. "Don't trouble yourself over it. I've got no place to be but here." He looked like he wanted to say more. He looked, for a second, like a boy who wanted to do something brave and knew he could not afford to. Then a bell rang from the back and he straightened up and went, and the moment closed over like water. While they waited, they talked, in the low way people talk when they've been made to sit a long time in the same room. Clay asked, careful, how she kept the bottomland green when everyone else had dried up. And she told him about the ditch, and about Josiah, and one thing led to another, and she said a thing then that she said the way you'd remark on the weather. "My Josiah wasn't always a farmer," she said. "He examined banks, rode the whole state at it, opened their books and checked their sums." She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "He used to say this very bank borrowed too heavy in the good years, took on more than it could carry. And when the paper went cheap, back before the crash, when nobody wanted it, he bought a little piece of it. Said it might be worth something someday, or might be worth nothing. Josiah bought all kinds of odd things." She said it, and then she looked out the window at the dusty square, as if she'd already forgotten it, and she changed the subject to the price of seed corn, and Clay, being young, let it go by like it was nothing. It was not nothing. But nobody in that lobby knew it yet. Not Clay, not Kessler, not the women behind their hands. And least of all the man behind the frosted door. At last the door opened, and it was for her. Harlan Pike did not come out to her. She was brought in to him. His office was paneled in dark wood, a wide desk, a green lamp, a ledger open under his hands. He was a lean man with a close gray beard and small clean spectacles, and the still, satisfied look of a man who has never once doubted he is right. He did not stand when she came in. He did not offer her the chair, though she took it anyway, straight-backed, satchel in her lap. He let her sit a moment while he finished a line in his book. Then he looked up over the spectacles. "Mrs. Thorne, Mrs. Pike, you know why the notice was posted." "I do. I've come to ask for time. One more season. Let me bring in one more crop and I'll clear the note. You'll lose nothing by it. The land's good. It's the only land in the county still worth anything, and you know it. Because your own director's out there in the lobby saying so out loud." Pike's mouth moved, not quite a smile. "That's precisely the trouble, Mrs. Thorne. The land is worth something. Which means the bank can realize its money now, cleanly, at auction. Rather than gamble another year on the weather and an old woman's back. You understand. It isn't personal. It's arithmetic." "I understand arithmetic," she said, "better than you'd credit." He looked at her the way a man looks at a chair that has spoken. Then he slid a paper across the desk. A refusal slip, the extension denied, a line for her signature at the bottom. "Sign that you've received notice." She read it. She read every line, slow, though he sighed once while she did. Then she reached into her mended coat, into the inside pocket, and drew out a pen to sign it. It was a fountain pen. Heavy, gold, chased with a fine pattern, the kind of pen a rich man carries and a poor woman could not possibly own. It caught the green lamplight. Pike's eyes went to it, just a flick, and then away, and he said nothing. Because it did not fit, and he did not want it to mean anything, so he decided it meant nothing. She signed her name. Adeline Thorne. Clean, firm letters. She capped the pen. She put it away. And the whole exchange took less than half a minute, her one season refused in the time it takes to boil an egg. "Good day, Mrs. Thorne," Pike said, already back in his book. "Good day, Mr. Pike." She might have left it there. She was a private woman, and she had her pride, and pride told her to walk out with her chin up and say no more. But the worst of it was still to come, and it came in the lobby, in front of everyone. Because Pike, it turned out, was not content to refuse her in private. There was a foreclosure to be entered into the record, and Pike liked a record made in front of witnesses. It kept the town orderly. It reminded them all what the bank could do. So he came out of his office behind her, papers in hand, and he had the clerk read the foreclosure notice aloud at the counter. The legal description of the property, the sum owed, the auction date, all of it, in the full hearing of the room, and the room was full. 19 people stood in that lobby by then, the 2 churchwomen, Kessler at his map, clay pail behind his window, the cattle buyer, farmers waiting their turn. All of them stopped to listen. Because there is nothing a hard county loves to watch quite like another neighbor going under. It reminds each man it is not yet him. The clerk read it out. The River Bottom Farm, $3,200. To be sold at public auction. Adeline stood by the bench with her hat in her hand and took it. She did not flinch. She had known every word was coming. And then Harlan Pike, who could have let it end there, chose to make it a lesson. He turned to the room, not to her, to the room, so they would all hear, and he said it in the loud, easy voice of a man performing for a crowd he owns. This bank, he said, doesn't lend patience to women who can't read a mortgage. The lobby went quiet. It was a cruel thing, and it was meant to be, and it landed like it was meant to. A couple of the men laughed the small laugh men laugh when the powerful make a joke. The 2 churchwomen looked down at their gloves. 2 people, only 2, looked away, ashamed to have heard it, ashamed to do nothing. Clay Dorsey's face went white and then red, and his hands gripped the edge of his counter, and he said nothing, because he was 22 and he had rent to pay, and Pike could put him on the street with a word. 19 witnesses. That was the number, and it would matter later, though not one soul in that room could have guessed how. Adeline Thorne set her hat on her head. She looked at Harlan Pike, and she was not angry. Or if she was, she had folded it away somewhere deep where it did not show. She said one thing. Quiet. Level, so quiet that half the room leaned in to catch it. I read one better than most, Mr. Pike. That was all. Nobody understood it. Pike least of all. He heard it as an old woman's small stubbornness, a last scrap of pride from someone with nothing left. And he turned his back on it and went into his office and shut the frosted door. The room let out its breath and went back to its business. The churchwomen murmured. Kessler rolled his map. And Adeline walked out the front door into the white glare of the square and began the 11 miles home. She did not cry on the road. She thought about crying. She had earned it, a good long cry, and there was no one on that dusty road to see. But somewhere in the 2nd mile the pain in her burned down into something harder and quieter and more useful, and by the time she came up the lane to the river bottom, past the green line of corn Josiah's ditch had kept alive, she was not weeping. She was resolved. There is a difference, and she knew it. She lit the lamp. She ate a little bread. And then she sat at the table and took down Josiah's ledger, the small black book worn soft as a glove, and she opened it, not to read the figures this time, but for another reason. There was a place in the spine where the leather had loosened over the years, where Josiah had kept things. She had always known it was there. She slid 2 fingers in and drew out a folded paper, thick, official, softened at the creases from long keeping. She unfolded it on the table under the lamp. It was a bank debenture, an instrument of debt issued years ago in a fatter year by the Cattlemen's Trust Bank of Ridgeway. A promise the bank had made when it borrowed heavy, a promise to pay. With a figure printed on its face that did not belong anywhere near her mended coat and her resold shoes. $180,000. Josiah had bought a piece of the bank's own paper, cheap, when it was cheap. when the bank was young and greedy and nobody thought its debts would ever come due hard. And over the years the piece had grown into the whole, and the whole had passed into the keeping of a great house in the city, the Meridian Trust of St. Louis, held there in her name. She was the beneficial holder. The debt of the Cattlemen's Trust Bank of Ridgeway, Kansas, the bank that had made her wait on a hard bench and told a full room she could not read, was owed, in the end, to her. She sat a long time and looked at it. The lamp hissed. Outside, the creek ran low and steady in the dark. She was not a schemer. She wanted the reader to understand that, if there had been anyone there to read her. She had not walked into that bank as a trap. She had walked in as a woman who owed $3,200 and wanted one more season to pay it honestly. The paper in her hand was not a weapon she had sharpened. It was a thing Josiah had left, and she had carried it the way you carry a dead man's watch, for the weight of him, not for the use of it. And her pride, which was deep as a well, told her plainly what it thought. It told her she would rather lose the farm, walk off the land Josiah cleared, than stand up in front of that town and announce what she held. Because to announce it would look like she had known all along, would look like a plot, and she had not plotted, and she would not be made to look as though she had. So she folded the debenture and put it back in the spine of the ledger and closed the book. That was the first night. The next days did not let her rest with it. Kessler wanted the land, and he wanted it fast. He came at Pike behind the frosted door, and word of it drifted out the way bank talk does, through the tellers, through Clay, who had taken it on himself now to be Adeline's eyes in that building. Kessler wanted the auction moved up. Sooner, before the redemption window ran its full course, if a way could be found, and there is always a way found when the men with the keys want it found. And Pike, who had a hole in his own books that the audience of his life could not see, but which was there, a shortfall. A sum that did not balance, needed a clean quick sale as much as Kessler wanted it. So Pike agreed. He set his whole name and standing on seizing the river bottom fast, mortgaging his reputation on it, never once knowing that the land he reached for sat on the very paper the widow held. There was a morning the depot agent tipped his hat to her. That was small, but it was strange, and Clay marked it and told her of it, puzzled. The agent at the rail depot, a stiff man who tipped his hat to no farm wife in that county, had straightened up when Adeline passed and said, "Morning, ma'am," with a care in it, a deference, that the town had never shown her. He had handled her letters, you see. He had seen the embossed name on them, going out and coming in, Meridian Trust, St. Louis, and a depot agent learns to read the weight of a correspondent, and he had drawn his own conclusions, and he was hedging his bets the way small men do. The town did not understand why he did it. Adeline understood exactly, and said nothing, and walked on. Then Pike grew petty. He sent a clerk out to the river bottom to inventory her stock, early, before the law required it, to count her hogs and her corn and her tools as though they were already the bank's, and to let her feel it. It was a cruelty with no purpose but to remind her she was helpless. The clerk went through her barn with a pencil while she stood in the yard, and she let him, and she said nothing. And her jaw was tight. That week a second letter came from the city. She opened this one. She sat at the table and read it twice. It was from the Meridian Trust, correct and cool, and in the body of it was a line she read 3 times over. "The instrument may be presented for redemption upon your instruction." That was all it said. Upon your instruction. The great house in the city was waiting on one word from an old woman in a mended coat. She had only to say it, and the paper would move, and the whole weight of it would come down. She folded the letter into the spine of the ledger, next to the debenture, and she sat with the lamp, and she did not say the word. Her pride and her need went to war at that table, and neither won for days. Because on the one hand there was the farm, the green line by the creek, Josiah's ditch, 40 years of her life. Losing it would be losing the last of him she could stand on. And on the other hand there was the way it would look, the plotting widow, the trap sprung, and she could not stomach it, and between the two she sat frozen. and the calendar on the wall lost its days one by one to her pencil. Then Clay came out to the farm. He came on foot after the bank closed, sandy hair, big collar, and he stood in her yard with his hat in his hands, and he was near to tears, because he was a good boy in a bad place, and it had gotten to be too much for him. "They've said it, Mrs. Thorne," he said. "The auction. Pike signed it this afternoon." Kessler stood right there while he did it. He swallowed. "It's the 10th. The 10th of the month. That's all the time there is. The 10th. She looked past him, out at the corn, at the low sun going gold and dusty behind it. The 10th. She thanked him. She gave him water and a piece of cornbread for the walk back, and she sent him off down the lane. And she stood in the yard until the dark came all the way down, and the crickets started, and the creek talked low to itself in the ditch Josiah dug. And that night she made up her mind, and it was not the mind her pride wanted her to make. She would not lose the farm to look humble. That was vanity dressed up as virtue. And Josiah, who read the hidden truth in every set of books, would have seen through it in a second and told her so. There was a thing to be done, a right and legal and quiet thing, a thing she had every honest claim to do, and refusing to do it out of pride was just another kind of lie. So in the morning she took down clean paper, she uncapped the heavy gold pen, and she wrote one letter, not a threat. She was careful of that. Not a boast. She did not gloat, not on paper, not in her heart, because there was nothing in her that wanted to gloat, only a tiredness and a resolve. She wrote to Mr. Alistair Crewe, the attorney of the Meridian Trust of St. Louis, and she gave him a plain instruction in plain words. Verify the instrument. Present it, quietly, before the 10th. That was all. Confirm what was true and let the truth stand where it fell. She read it over once, she folded it, she sealed it, and she did not send it with anyone or leave it for the postman on the lane. She put on her mended coat and her plain hat, and she walked, herself, the long dusty road into Ridgeway to the rail depot where the stiff agent tipped his hat and said, "Ma'am," and took the letter from her hand and looked at the name on it and grew, if anything, more careful. She watched him stamp it and put it in the city bag. She paid her postage from the small coins in her satchel. Then she turned and walked back out into the white square, past the tall brick bank with the gold name on the glass, where behind the frosted door a lean man in clean spectacles was arranging, with great satisfaction and no idea at all, to sell the ground out from under his own feet on the 10th of the month. She did not look at the bank as she passed. She had said her one word. The letter was in the bag, and the bag was going to the city. And there is a kind of quiet that comes over a person once a thing that cannot be taken back has finally been done. 11 miles home, in the dust, in the mended coat. And behind her, in the bank, the clock she could not see was still ticking toward the 10th. Only now it was not ticking for her. The telegram reached Ridgeway on a Thursday. It came over the wire in the cramped back room of the depot, and the operator wrote it out in his careful hand, and it was addressed to the Cattlemen's Trust Bank, marked for the attention of the president. The cashier carried it up the street himself. He was a nervous man named Poole, and he had been nervous for weeks, though he could not have told you why. He handed it to Harlan Pike across the wide desk. Pike read it once. He read it again. Then he set it down and smoothed it flat with 2 fingers, the way a man smooths a thing that has annoyed him. "Meridian Trust," he said. "St. Louis." "Yes, sir," a correspondent query. He tapped the paper. "They hold paper in half the banks between here and Kansas City. It's routine. They want confirmation of a ledger balance. Wire them back the figure and be done with it." Poole stood a moment longer. "It asks for the president's confirmation. By name. Then I've confirmed it." Pike did not look up. "Send the figure." And that was all. The arrogance held. The shadow of the thing passed over the room, and Pike never felt the cold of it. He went back to the plat map on the corner table, the one Kessler had weighted down with the stapler and the inkwell so the corners would not curl. And he traced the line of the river bottom acres with his clean finger, and he thought about the 10th. Vernon Kessler came in that afternoon. He was a heavy man who wore his watch chain across a wide vest, and he had a way of filling a doorway. But there was something in his face today that had not been there before. He had heard the word meridian, too. He heard most things. "Who's asking about your books, Harlan?" "Nobody's asking about my books." "A St. Louis trust wires this bank the same week you push an auction up 8 days, and nobody's asking about your books." Kessler sat without being asked. "I've got money in this, Harlan. I don't like weather I can't see coming." "There's no weather." Pike turned from the map. "There's a widow 11 miles out who can't make her note, and there's 40 days of redemption that run out on the 10th. And there's you, who wanted the bottomland cheap. I'm giving it to you cheap. That's the whole of it." Kessler looked at him a long moment. He was a greedy man, but he was not a stupid one, and the two things had kept a war in him his whole life. "See that it is," he said. And he stood, and he left. But he did not clap Pike on the shoulder the way he used to. He went out with his hands in his pockets, and at the door he paused and looked back once and said nothing and went. Pike told himself it was nothing. A man's nerves. He had a shortfall in his own accounts that he had papered over in the spring. A hole he meant to fill with the sale of the river bottom and 2 other seizures before the year turned. Nobody knew of it but Poole, and Poole was too frightened to breathe it. The bottomland would cover the worst of it. On the 10th the ground would change hands and the books would balance, and no one would ever know how close the whole tower had leaned. He slept well those nights. That was the thing that would haunt him after. He slept like a righteous man. Out at the farm, Adeline did not sleep well at all. She had done the thing she could not take back, and now there was nothing to do but wait, and waiting was the hardest work she knew. She kept the ditch running. She fed the stock. She read the ledger by lamplight, Josiah's small even numbers, the years of another man's careful life, and she did not turn any more to the page where the folded paper had been. Because the paper was in St. Louis now, in the hands of a man named Crew whom she had never met. And she had to trust him the way you trust a bridge in the dark. You put your weight on it or you stay where you are. She had put her weight on it. Clay Dorsey rode out on the 9th. He came on a borrowed horse in the evening with dust on him, and he would not come in. He stood on the porch with his hat in his hands, and he was young, and he was afraid, and he had ridden 11 miles anyway. "It's tomorrow, Mrs. Thorne, 10 in the morning." In the lobby, he swallowed. "I didn't know if word reached you. I didn't want you to not know." "I know, Clay. Mr. Pike's had the notice in the window 3 days." He turned his hat in his hands. "There's men coming to bid. Mr. Kessler's people." He looked at her, and there was something breaking in his young face. "I'm sorry. I keep saying it, and it doesn't do anything. I'm just sorry." Adeline looked at this boy who had brought her coffee when the whole town looked at their shoes. She thought about telling him. She came very near to it. But it was not hers to tell yet. Not until the paper stood on its own feet in the light, and so she only said, "You've been kind to me." "That's not nothing. That's the opposite of nothing." And she gave him a jar of the last of her preserves to carry home, and she watched him ride off into the dark, and she stood on the porch a long while after the sound of the horse was gone. Then she went in. She took down her mended coat and brushed the dust from it. She set out her plain hat. She found, in the drawer, the heavy gold fountain pen that had been Josiah's, that she had carried into the bank all those weeks like a small secret against her heart. She laid it in the inside pocket of the coat. She did not know if she would need it. But she would go dressed for whatever the morning was. She was up before light. She walked the 11 miles. The lobby of the Cattlemen's Trust was full by 10. It was full of the same faces that had been there on the day Pike said the words, because a town that small has a long memory and a short list of things to watch, and the seizure of the river bottom farm was the event of the autumn. There were bidders along the wall. There was Kessler by the window, though he stood apart, and he kept his eyes on the door. There was Poole behind the counter, gray as ash. There was Clay Dorsey at the far end, and his hands were shaking. 19 people. The same 19, near enough, and a handful more. Adeline came in at 5 minutes to the hour, and she took the hard bench along the wall. The one she had waited on before, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she waited. The room looked at her and then looked away, the way people do at a thing that is about to be hurt in front of them. Pike came out at 10 exactly. He had a sheaf of papers. He set them on the counter, and he squared them with a tap. "We're here on the matter of the Thorne mortgage," he said to the room, in the voice men use when they enjoy the sound of their own fairness. $3,200 in default, redemption period expired this day. The bank moves to auction the property known as the River Bottom Acres, this being the 10th of the month. All in order and by the law. He looked, at last, at Adeline. Unless the mortgagor has come with $3,200, in which case the bank would be pleased to accept it. It was a cruelty dressed as a courtesy. He knew she did not have it. The room knew. He wanted her to say it out loud. Adeline said, "I have not." Misty, Pike then, the front door opened. A man came in out of the white morning light, and he was a stranger. And in Ridgeway a stranger was a thing everyone turned to see. He was neither young nor old. He wore a dark traveling suit without a wrinkle in it, which was its own marvel in that dust, and he carried a leather case, and he had the still, cool face of a man who has never in his life raised his voice because he has never in his life needed to. He stopped just inside the door and let it swing shut behind him. "I'm looking for the president of this bank," he said. "You found him." Pike did not like the interruption. "We're in the middle of a proceeding, sir. If you'll wait, I won't, I'm afraid. My business is with this proceeding." The man crossed the floor. His shoes were quiet on the boards. "My name is Alistair Crew. I am attorney for the Meridian Trust of St. Louis. You had a wire from us on Thursday." Poole made a small sound behind the counter. "A correspondent query," Pike said. "I answered it. You confirmed a figure. Yes, that was helpful." Crew set his case on the broad table by the window, next to the plat map, and he opened it. "It confirmed what my client needed to know before I came. I'm here to present an instrument for the record, Mr. Pike, and to do it publicly since the matter has been made public." He drew out a single folded document, heavy paper, and he unfolded it with care. "This is a debenture of the Cattlemen's Trust Bank of Ridgeway. Issued in a better year. Sold, when this bank needed cash, into the hands of parties who have since transferred it, in the ordinary way of such things, to the Meridian Trust of St. Louis, which holds it now in trust for a beneficial owner." The room had gone very quiet. Pike's face had not changed yet. He did not understand yet. He only knew he did not like it. "That's the bank's business," Pike said. "Not this room's. If Meridian holds a piece of our paper, it holds it in good standing, and it will be honored in the ordinary course. This is a foreclosure, sir, not a—" "The beneficial owner," Crew said. And now he turned, and he looked across the crowded lobby to the hard bench along the wall, is Mrs. Adeline Thorne. Nobody moved. It is a strange thing to watch a room understand something all at once. It went across the faces like wind across wheat. The bidders along the wall, Kessler at the window, whose face closed like a door, Poole, who put one hand flat on the counter to steady himself, and Pike, on whom it landed slowest of all, because he had the furthest to fall. "That's—" Pike stopped. He laughed, a short sound with no bottom to it. "That's absurd. That woman came in here to beg for an extension. She couldn't make $3,200. She walked here. You want me to believe? I want you to believe nothing, Mr. Pike. I want you to read." Crew carried the paper to the counter and laid it flat before him, turned so the whole front of the room could see the seal on it. The very seal of the Cattlemen's Trust. "Read the figure." Pike looked down. He did not want to, but every eye in the room pushed his head down, and he looked. $180,000, Crew said, for the room, since Pike's mouth had stopped working. A callable debenture of this bank, held for the benefit of Mrs. Thorne, callable Mr. Pike, at the holder's instruction. Which is to say that the woman you are this morning attempting to turn off 11 miles of ground for want of $3,200 is the single largest creditor of your institution. He let that stand a moment in the still air. And this bank cannot redeem it. I have seen your correspondent figures. You confirmed them yourself, on Thursday, with your own name. You do not have the reserves. If she calls this note, the Cattlemen's Trust closes its doors by the end of the week. Somewhere in the room a chair scraped. Nobody sat back down. Adeline rose from the hard bench. She did it slowly, because she was 68 and her knees were 68, and she stood, and she smoothed her mended coat, and she looked across the lobby at Harlan Pike over the heads of the town that had watched him break her. "You said I couldn't read a mortgage, Mr. Pike," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The room carried it for her. "You said it right here, so all these good people could hear you say it. I've thought about that a great deal, walking home." She paused. "I read one better than most. I hold the one under your feet." It was Pike's face that was the whole of it then. It was the thing the 19 witnesses would tell their children about 40 years on. The color going out of it. The spectacles suddenly too clean, too bright, on a face gone the gray of old paper. The mouth opening on a defense that was not there, and closing, and opening again. He put a hand on the counter, the same counter, and the hand was not steady. "That's," he said. There are procedures. There are." He turned to Poole. "Get me the." And he saw Poole's face, and he stopped. Because Poole's face told him it was all true, every word, and that Poole had known the hole in the books was that deep, and had been too afraid to say how deep. Kessler was already moving. He came off the wall by the window and he crossed toward the door, not fast but not slow either, a heavy man remembering he had somewhere else to be. Pike saw him going. "Vernon," it came out cracked. "Vernon, this doesn't touch you, It touches everything I've got in this building, Harlan." Kessler stopped at the door. He did not shout. He was past shouting. He looked at Pike the way a man looks at a bridge he has just watched go into the river, glad only that he got his foot back in time. "You told me there was no weather." He set his hat on his head. "I'm a director of this bank. I resign it, as of this minute, in front of witnesses. Whatever's in those books is yours. It was always going to be yours." And he looked, just once, at Adeline, and there was something in it that was almost respect, and almost fear, and mostly the simple arithmetic of a man cutting a rope. Then he went out into the white light and he did not come back. And within the month he had sold what he could sell in the county and gone, and Ridgeway did not see him again. The plat map lay rolled half open on the corner table where he had left it, the river bottom acres traced in his own pencil, weighted still with the stapler and the inkwell. Nobody touched it. It stayed there all that day like a thing that had died. Pike stood alone at his counter. The bidders along the wall were looking at their hats. It had come apart so fast and so completely that there was nothing left for him to stand behind. No ledger, no procedure, no fairness dressed as courtesy. He was a lean man in clean spectacles, and the whole town was watching him understand that he had spent the autumn arranging to sell the ground out from under his own feet, exactly as the frosted door had hidden him doing it. And here is the thing the town did not expect. Here is the thing that broke him more completely than any call on the note could have. Adeline Thorne showed him mercy. She crossed the lobby. The room parted for her without meaning to. She came to the counter where he had made her wait, where he had made her stand, hat in hand, coat mended at both elbows, and she stopped, and she looked at Alistair Crew. "Mr. Crew," she said, "you'll hold the note. You won't call it." Crew inclined his head very slightly. "You understand what that means, Mrs. Thorne. You have it in your hand to close this bank today. Given the morning, no one would fault you. I understand it." She looked around the lobby, At the faces, at the tellers, at the little brass grills and the savings books she knew were behind them. There's people in this county with 40 years of egg money behind that counter. Widows worse off than me. Men who never did a thing to anybody. If I call that note to punish one man, their savings burn with him. She turned back to Crew. I won't buy my satisfaction with their ruin. Hold the note. Don't call it. And that was the blow that landed hardest of all. Pike could have stood, maybe, against her vengeance. A man braces for a blow he has earned. What he could not stand against was being spared by the woman he had mocked in front of the same 19 faces because her mercy did what his cruelty never could. It measured him. It stood him next to her and showed the whole room the size of each of them, and there was no procedure in any ledger he could hide behind from that. He sat down. He had to. He sat down on the clerk's stool behind his own counter, this president of the Cattlemen's Trust, and he put his hand over his mouth, and he did not speak for a long moment. When he did speak, it was to her. And it was quiet, and it cost him everything he had left. Mrs. Thorne, his voice was not the voice from before. I have to ask you for terms. There it was, the scorner petitioning the scorned. The whole room heard it. The same room that had heard him say she couldn't read a mortgage. He had to ask her, before all of them, what she would allow him to keep. Adeline let it sit only as long as it needed to. She was not cruel. That was the difference between them, and it had always been the difference, and now the whole town could see it plain. The terms are simple, Mr. Pike, she said. You'll release my mortgage. The $3,200 and the note on the river bottom marked paid in full against the weight of what your bank owes me. I keep the farm. Free and clear. Josiah cleared that ground with his hands, and I've kept the ditch running through the worst drought this county ever saw, and it's mine. And it stays mine. And no man sells it out from under me ever again. She drew a breath. That's all I want from you. My own ground, and to owe you nothing, and to be owed nothing back that I mean to collect. The debenture stays where it is, uncalled. So long as this bank deals honest, that's the terms. It was more mercy than the arithmetic required. It left him his bank and his building and his depositors whole. It cost her the chance to be rich, if she'd wanted to be rich, which she never had. It was the trade of a woman who wanted one growing season honestly and had never once wanted more. Pike looked up at her. Whatever a man like that has in place of a soul, something moved in it. Why, he said. It was not quite a question. Why would you, after what He could not finish it. He did not have the words for what he had done, out loud, in front of them all. Because I'd rather sleep, Adeline said. You'll learn what that's worth. She turned to the young teller at the end of the counter, who had been standing all this while with his shaking hands and his wet eyes, hardly daring to breathe. Clay. She said it gently. You'll draw the papers, the release and the terms as I've said them, and Mr. Crew will see they're correct. I want it in your hand and no one else's. She looked at him steadily. You were kind to me when it cost you something to be kind. That's the rarest thing there is. I won't forget it, and I won't have the town forget it either. Clay Dorsey nodded and could not speak and got down the ledger book and began to write, and his hands did not shake anymore once they had work to do. Alistair Crew closed his leather case. He had said what he came to say and validated what he came to validate, and he was a cool and correct man who had watched a great many rooms come apart and had never once let it show on him. But he paused at the door, and he looked back at the old woman in the mended coat, and he said, Your husband bought that paper for 11 cents on the dollar, Mrs. Thorne, in a year when everyone else was selling. He wrote a note in the trust file. It's still there. A very small thing that was almost a smile touched the corner of his mouth. It says, Someone honest may need this someday. Hold it careful. He put on his hat. He held it careful. So did you. And he went out into the light and was gone to catch the afternoon train, and the town of Ridgeway never saw him again either, though it spoke of him for years. Adeline signed the papers with the heavy gold fountain pen from the inside pocket of her coat, the pen too fine for a pauper. The pen Clay had noticed weeks ago and said nothing about. She signed her name where Clay had drawn the line for it, Adeline Thorne, in Josiah's ink from Josiah's pen, and she capped it, and she put it away. Then she walked home. 11 miles, in the dust, in the mended coat. She did not look at the bank as she passed it, the way she had not looked at it before. She had said her one word, weeks ago, and now the word had come true, and there was nothing left to say to a building. Behind her the clock that had ticked toward the 10th went quiet. It had run out. And it had run out for the man who said it, not for the woman he said it against. The spring came green. It came the way spring comes after a hard year, careful and late and then all at once. And the creek ran, and the old irrigation ditch that Adeline had kept clear through the whole drought carried the water out across the river bottom acres the way Josiah had built it to, 60 years of another man's foresight still doing its quiet work. The bottom land greened first, as it always had, the last green acreage on the creek become the first. And folks driving the road slowed their wagons to look at it. Josiah's pocket ledger sat closed on the mantel. Adeline had mailed the debenture back to St. Louis in the fall, once the release was recorded and the terms were sealed, and it lived in the Meridian Trust's files now with the old note in Josiah's hands still folded beside it, holding careful, doing no harm. Hanging over the Cattlemen's Trust like a hand that could close but chose not to. The ledger on the mantel was only a ledger now, emptied of its power. It was just the record of a good man's careful life, and Adeline still read it some nights by the lamp, the way other widows read scripture, though she did not need to turn to any particular page anymore. Clay Dorsey brought her coffee on the porch that spring. He had a way of turning up on a Sunday with a tin of it, and they would sit, the old woman and the young man, and watch the water move in the ditch. He was the honest clerk of the Cattlemen's Trust now, the one folks asked for. The one who had defended a widow when it cost him, and the town had made a small legend of that too. He would be the president of that bank one day. Everyone said so. Adeline thought they were right. They did not talk much about Harlan Pike. There was not much to say. He kept his bank. That was the whole of his punishment and the whole of his mercy, and the two were the same thing, and he knew it every day. He kept his bank only because a woman he had insulted in front of 19 people had let him keep it, and there was not a morning he sat at that wide desk that he did not know exactly why the doors were still open. He grew quieter over the years. He grew, some said, almost kind, late, the way a hard tree grows soft only where the lightning struck it. Whether that was penance or only exhaustion, Ridgeway never decided. He never mocked another soul across that counter, that much was certain. Vernon Kessler was long gone by then, sold out and moved on, chasing cheaper ground in a county where nobody knew the story. The plat map with the river bottom traced in his pencil had been thrown out with the trash the same week, and no one missed it. Adeline lived a good while yet on the farm she kept. She kept the ditch running every year of it. And when people asked her, as people did, how she had done it, how she had walked into that bank and turned the whole thing over without ever once raising her voice, she would only pour the coffee and look out at the water and say that Josiah had always told her the loudest thing in any room is a person who has nothing to prove. Some ledgers are read out loud, in front of a crowd, to break a person down. And some are read in silence, by lamplight, by a woman who owns her own ground, and those are the ones that hold. Tell me the town you're watching from.